Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming to listen to our session. This is a session which is being hosted by the Floodplain Meadows Partnership. We are a consortium of scientists and NGOs and governmental bodies. We're hosted by the Open University, and our prime job is to protect and restore and understand floodplain meadows. And for those who don't know, more details will be given throughout this presentation, but they are the hay meadows that traditionally existed and were managed alongside floodplains. It sort of says it on the tin, really. My name is Olivia Nelson. I am the advocacy officer. My role is to influence and push for better support in government policy, funding, structures, strategies for floodplain meadows. I also work on species-rich grassland and getting more support for that throughout policy. So today we will have 4 speakers, and the way we want to structure it is we'll have a presentation, and then there'll be, because we're pushed for time, a 2-minute question and answer just for anything to clarify the presentation. Anything else that may have a bit more deeper or meaningful, we'll wait till the end. So we'll have the 4 presentations, and then we wanted to hold this as a sort of workshop, but that's quite tricky. What you'll find on your seats are, there's a couple of post-it notes, or you can use paper that you've got. We would really, really appreciate it if you wrote down whether you are actually restoring floodplain meadows, or you're thinking about restoring floodplain meadows with your details, and you're happy to pass that on to us. Also, if you're interested in our newsletter, please write your details and pass it on. And at the end of the session, we'll post up some sort of questions, issues. And again, if you don't get a chance to ask us the question or the issue you want to raise, again, it'd be an opportunity just to scribble down there. And again, with your best handwriting, which is what I always say to my daughters, pass that on to us as well. So because we're so pushed, I'm going to go straight on to the first speaker, which is Professor David Gowing. He is the director of the Floodplain Meadow Partnership. He is Professor of Botany at the Open University, and he has studied floodplain meadows for over 18 years. He has also worked as an academic advisor with the Open University. We obviously have our relationship with the BBC, and actually David had the honour of looking for the scripts and advising with Green Planet. So I will pass straight on to you, David.
Thank you, Olivia, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, floodplain meadows. Oh, my clicker does work. So, I thought I'd start with what are meadows, because that term gets used rather widely these days. I mean, the word meadow comes from the verb to mow, so they are grasslands that are mown. Why are we particularly interested in floodplains? And I'll talk about their history in a moment, but that's historically where meadows were, on floodplains, because that is the one part of the landscape that nutrients are refreshed each year. If you try to make hay on dry areas, you tend to exhaust the soil quite rapidly. So we're interested in floodplain meadows for their ecosystem services as well as their biodiversity. And as Olivia has said, we've been researching them for a number of years, and now we're interested in disseminating that knowledge and helping people to manage and restore their land. Next slide, please. Clicker seems intermittent. So the first thing to say about these floodplain meadows are they're incredibly diverse, that with up to 40 species per square metre, they are the most diverse vegetation in the UK, with only chalk grasslands rivaling them in terms of their alpha diversity, as you can see in this slide. They're absolute blaze of colour at this time of year, but this is also the time of year when they're best cut, which is often a difficult, and we spend a lot of our time trying to sell that message to local residents and community groups who are distressed at seeing all these flowers disappearing under a cutter. But this is traditionally the time to cut hay, and diversity benefits from having the hay made at this time. Next slide. But it's not entirely about plants, that these meadows are also important habitats for a wide range of different species. particularly ground nesting birds, such as the redshank here, curlew, snipe, skylark. So they're important habitats to maintain. The problem is they were once so widespread in our landscape, but of the floodplain meadow plant community, which is one dominated by the great Burnet flower, there's less than 1,500 hectares in the entire of the UK. That's less than the footprint of Heathrow Airport. So they have virtually disappeared. The remaining stands, which are shown on this map, are now pretty well all protected under various levels of designation, but it's important to preserve what we've got and to use them as seed sources to restore some of their former extent. And the key role of meadows in farming for the last 1,000 years has been nutrient flow. That, as I said, floodplains are the one part of the landscape that get a new flush of nutrients delivered to them as sediment each year. And the meadow converts those nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium into biomass, which can then be either grazed directly by ruminants or made into hay to keep the animals alive through winter. You can then use the manure from those animals, whether you fold the sheep on arable, as they did traditionally in the Middle Ages, or if you spread the winter manure back on the land, that allows crops to be grown. And all those roots end up producing food for humans. So looking back at Doomsday, it appears that pretty well every parish had its floodplain meadow, and there seems to be quite a tight correlation between the area of floodplain meadow a parish had and the population. It seemed to be the limiting element of the rural economy back in the Middle Ages. So there's a huge social history involved. If we can have the next slide. Oh, I jumped one there. Can I go back to the map, please? And forward one. Yeah. So various people around the country have been looking at historic land use, and this is an example from West Sussex, the River Rother, where the wiggly line through the middle of this slide with a sort of turquoise green colour is floodplain meadow as a land use, and it completely covers the floodplain. So it shows how important historically these systems were for supporting the rural economy. And while the number 97% is often bandied around as the amount of species-rich grassland we've lost during the last century, from our initial estimates, we think for floodplain meadows that figure is 99%, that they were once hugely extensive, and now we're down to just 1,500. So they're probably the habitat that we've lost the highest proportion of anything in this country. And that's one of the reasons we drew together the partnership that Olivia referred to. So we currently have 10 members. I think we've gained the CLA since this slide was made, working in partnership to share resources, to share knowledge, in order to support landowners to manage and restore their meadows. Oh, done it again. So the objectives of the partnership are, as I've just been describing, to measure the historic extent and the current extent, to emphasize the importance of these systems, to support their restoration, to estimate the amount of carbon that they sequester, because they are very important from that perspective, and Claire, who speaks next, will develop that idea. We're also, and this is Olivia's work, trying to develop the new agri-environment schemes to give landowners support to manage and restore them, and on a wider scale to encourage the reconnection of rivers with the floodplain to try and enhance the natural processes where the floodplain meadow has a particular role, both because it's tolerant of flooding, and so it can be used in natural flood management, and also because it takes nutrients out of the river system. It could have a new importance in the nutrient neutrality schemes. So restoration is down basically to spreading hay from an existing meadow onto areas, whether arable or existing pasture, that would benefit from being diversified. And so we have a lot of experience of schemes around the country, either using brush harvested seed or, in this case, spreading green hay. And our hope is that the ecosystem services this system provides is fully recognised, and that public money is paid for public goods, because not only are they very biodiverse, they're also very productive. As I've said, they supply natural flood management, they store carbon, they clean up the water, as well as having a lot of importance in our social history. So, if you'd like to know more, this is our website address, and the team currently working within the partnership. We're happy to talk to any landowners or wildlife groups, whatever your interest. If you're wanting to manage or restore, please get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Just to say to you, on the seats, if you don't have one, we've got 2 guidance notes that we've produced specifically for sort of farming and landowners, which gives you a sort of general guidelines for both the management of existing meadows and also the restoration and creation of meadows. So do pick those up. We do also have some more information here, including a great guide of how to actually identify the different plants, the different communities. And we also have a lot of information on we have a new website now, and a lot of information, research, but also guidance on how you actually would assess your meadow or your land, whether it's ripe for restoration. So, like I said, either come and speak to us or do go onto our website. But can I ask if there's any initial questions just to David, just to clarify? We've got 1 or 2 minutes that we can answer, so probably 1 question, 2 questions. No? Excellent. That helps with our timing very much. Thank you. I'm going to pass on now to Dr. Claire Lawson. She is the Senior Lecturer in Ecology at the Open University. She's a member of our team. She's been working with David for more years than she cares to think. She has supported the work of the F&P. She does a lot of the research at the moment on soil carbon, but also a lot of research going up on the Scottish Islands, looking at a habitat up there we're calling oceanic wet grassland. And again, through the Open University, Claire has worked with the BBC on Springwatch and Countryfile, including winning award. Claire was one of the people who developed the pollinator iSpot, was it called? In 2020 when we were all locked down. So that was Claire was very heavily involved with that. So can I pass on to you, Claire?
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, so today I'm just going to go through some of the results of some research projects that focusing on soil carbon in particular. Flooding in floodplains. Really want to emphasise that they're multifunctional landscapes. So we use them a lot for producing food, and I'll come on to that later, but also they're multifunctional, so they store water, they store carbon, and a lot of the ecosystem services that David's already alluded to. So this is the River Ouse in flood, and it shows it spilling out over onto the floodplain where traditionally a floodplain meadow would have been. So within a floodplain, they've been modified a huge amount. David was talking about the historical value and how, you know, in medieval times, the extent of the floodplain would have been traditionally meadows. And we can see here that actually In England, over 70% is in intensive agriculture, so either arable or horticulture or improved grassland. And there's very little natural habitat left within these flood zones. And also within England, the bit at the bottom that always really surprises me is the percentage of urban and suburban. So when you hear flooding hitting the news, that's part of the reason is that the floodplains have been changed a lot, and rivers have been disconnected from their floodplains. So these are data for England and Wales. So what we would really interested in is looking at floodplains and actually see what they could do in terms of the soils, because soils are really important. I've been to some great talks today about soil composting, adding fungi, changing things. So, but in terms of carbon, they store about 95% of the terrestrial carbon. So we're all very aware of how much carbon dioxide is being emitted to the atmosphere. But actually, in terms of the terrestrial carbon, within the UK, a lot of it, 95% of it, is actually in the soils. So soils are extremely important, and they're usually somewhat neglected. So grasslands also, in terms of effective carbon stores, I think are somewhat neglected. We hear a lot about peats, we hear a lot about tree planting, but the store within the soils of grasslands are again very important, and I'm going to come on to some figures later on. So you can just see here the distribution of the organic matter through the soil profile, and you can see that in the grassland, actually the distribution goes much lower than within the comparable woodland. Oop. It goes too far. Okay. So part of the reason that we think you get this distribution of carbon down the soil profile is to do with the rooting structures of floodplain meadow plants. So traditionally, you would have the great burnet, Sanguisorba officinalis, and meadow foxtail, Albicus, and you can see here that the depth that these roots get down the soil profile in these quite deep alluvial soils are probably part of the reason that you're getting carbon down to such depths in these soils. So it's also the diversity of the rooting structures as well. So part of the reason why floodplain meadows are so good at the soil carbon storage is to do with the rooting structure of the floodplain meadow plants that you find within them. So I've said grasslands are very good at storing carbon, but here are just some figures from the National Survey, Countryside Survey, looking at the differences in how much carbon is within the different habitat types. So you can see that arable and horticulture has much lower carbon, but even improved grassland has much higher levels. But again, relating to neutral grassland and woodland, so that those figures are pretty comparable. So we've also looked at the soil carbon in species-rich floodplain meadows. So this was from North Meadow at Cricklade, which is a National Nature Reserve on the Thames in Cricklade. And there's much more within the top 10 centimetre profile here than there is in even the neutral grassland and improved grassland. And then if we go to a depth of 50 centimetres, we're getting over 200 tonnes of carbon per hectare in that soil depth. So they are huge stores of carbon, and we ought to try and keep the carbon within the soils. And so this was the top figures are the average across quite a few different sites, but North Meadow itself was again slightly higher. So we're looking at over 100 tonnes, 110 tonnes per hectare in that top 10 centimetres. So a recent project that we've had on the Thames, we've been comparing the different land use types. So these are on the same soil within the floodplain. So we've been looking at the species-rich ancient meadows, but we've also been looking at restored meadows and arable sites, just to see how these different land managements affect the soils within them. So we've been working from Oxford upstream towards Chimney Meadows, which is a wildlife site trust in the upper Thames. Oops. So one of the things that's really important in floodplains is the soil structure. How dense the soils are, how much air they contain within them, because that's really important for flood storage. And you can see here that the density of the soil has changed remarkably from when it was ancient meadow to when it's been put into arable agriculture. So the density of the soil has increased, so it's been compacted. So this has a big effect on the carbon storage, but also what can be stored in terms of flood storage and the through flow of water actually through the soil. So one of the things we're looking at is how restoring that has actually changed both the density of the soil and the carbon. And we can see here that by reverting arable back to species-rich grasslands, there are different age classes here of the restored land, we're actually changing the bulk density. So it's gone from over 1.3 back to slightly under 1, whereas the ancient meadows are very low in terms of their bulk density, which is great because it shows that the soils are functioning. So here are the carbon results from the same study. And we can see here that the ancient meadows, again, have much higher amounts of organic carbon in them in terms of, these are in kilograms per metre squared. So we're getting between 20 and 24 kilograms, which is 200 to 240 tonnes per hectare. And again, the arable has been depleted in terms of its organic carbon, but the restored meadows are doing their job, as in by restoring the meadows back, we are getting an increase in the amount of carbon stored within the soils. So by restoring ancient meadows, we're looking at over what timescale this occurs, but obviously it's going to take a while, but we are getting improvements in the amount of organic carbon stored within the soils. So as David already talked about, really, is that these floodplain meadows, the benefits that we get from them are huge and wide-ranging. So I've talked about carbon storage, but David's already talked about the rich biodiversity and the cultural heritage, and obviously storing water is another public good that floodplain meadows are able to give us. But again, they're still in agricultural production. So then they are a managed system. They produce a productive crop with very low inputs. You can extensively graze on them, and also it can remove nutrients. So we're getting hay crops of up to 6 kilograms per hectare. So what challenges and opportunities are there facing floodplain meadows? We think really there's a lack of recognition in public policy. So we would like to see floodplain meadows really recognised. So the floodplain, farming in a floodplain is quite different, and I'm sure Andy will come on to that later. But the real thing to get across is the need for long-term active management. Again, we would like to see a restoration target. So Natural England looks like that might be coming on stream, where we have a target of restoring 70,000 hectares, which would be great in terms of all these public goods that can come from them. And just one final slide really is a project that Chris is going to talk about in more detail. So we've been working in the Severn and Avon Vales as well, doing a very similar project in terms of looking at carbon storage. But Chris and his team have also been looking at farmer interviews. So I'd just like to say thank you for listening before I pass on to Chris.
Thank you, Claire. That was a huge gallop. No, it's brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, before we go on to Chris, is there any questions? I can only really take one. Just to clarify, yes, there's a lady there in the yellow. No. Where are you? Can you hand up?
Thank you. I was just wondering, you had a slide up saying that the floodplain meadows can be part of a productive system, but I was wondering whether there's any research to show that they have greater ecosystem benefits if there's no production happening on those meadows. So if they were being left entirely for ecosystem benefits, would there be more biodiversity? Would there be greater carbon sequestration, etc.?
We haven't done that comparison, but in terms of actually maintaining the habitat itself, it's evolved in a semi-natural system. So it has evolved through the cutting. So some of these meadows are over 1,000 years old, and so they've been cut over that time period. So the actual habitat itself is what I would say is a semi-natural habitat in terms of human input is required into them. So they do require some continuous active management in order to maintain the biodiversity and the complement of species that are there and what also they support.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go now on to Chris Short. He is the Associate Professor in Environmental Governance for the Countryside and Community Research Institute. And he worked with us as part of the Flourishing Floodplains, as Claire has said, developing what the farmer-friendly outputs in relating to management of floodplains. He's also been involved with the NERC-funded Landwise project and DEFRA Elm test and trials.
Great, thanks Olivia. Great to be here and see and experience groundswell. So you've heard about the great messages from Floodplain, the excellent ecosystem services they provide. So the task that we were provided with was to, as part of the Flourishing Floodplains projects, work with some farmers in the Severn Vale to create some case studies, get some information that will help other farmers who are looking at and have floodplains and want to look at how they could manage them differently. So this is what I'll talk about. There's a picture there of the floodplain and the rest of the team on there. So Charlotte, who would be here if she hadn't just given birth to a lovely baby boy, Honor and B. So we're all based in the CCRI, and we were involved in this sector of the project. So we examined a whole range of existing case studies looking at regenerative farming to try and pitch what we're looking to do. We had a farmer workshop with farmers across the Severn Vale, and then we selected 4 farmers who were in a very different state, different position in terms of how they manage their floodplain, and developed some resources which hopefully will be available, which are going to be available and be useful into getting out the message across. And I just wanted to share that with you today. And the idea is that we can iterate, we can build on those, we might go back to them and see how things have changed, and particularly the issue around the future. And after me, you'll hear from Andy, who is one of our the case study farms. So what we found, we're looking at existing case studies. It's really important to ask open-ended questions. So you really want farmers to talk about why, what it is that's really special about these areas, and get them enthused and sharing those experiences. That's what other farmers really value. Need to be available in a range of different formats, and some videos, some podcasts, something tangible to take away. Obviously easy to understand, but focus from farmers or other farmers are interested in tipping points. What's the narrative? What's the journey sense that they've been going through as managing floodplains? And picking up on those differences, sense between what works and what didn't work. So we held the workshop, sense for a number of farmers, and it was very clear, fascinating to see farmers discuss the local knowledge that was involved, and particularly years of observation of seeing how a floodplain behaves, and that time about when you do or don't and move. And that short periods of flooding are seen as beneficial because they bring nutrients, and longer periods of flooding, whatever time of year, no, that's really not good at all. Sharing challenges, issues around blackgrass burden, particularly for those farmers who had arable within their floodplain, maybe an emphasis on spring crops, short-term grown, etc. Nearly all the farmers we were talked to across the piece were in agro-environment schemes, but they shared a common concern that some payment rates were too low, some aspects weren't valued, like ponds, the additional things that they could bring to the farm way out way outweigh the small area that might be involved. Issues around cutting dates. We know we're in a period of climate change, so hay crops can be ready at very different times. Not least if you're Cornwall to Northumberland, to have a fixed date isn't very helpful. And if you want to go early, then the whole derogation system just takes too long. A lot of nervousness, nothing new here. I've experienced this last year when I came to Grand Spa. I don't think it'll be different this year about carbon accounting. Someone likened it to the Wild West. So very uncertain areas around what systems you go for. Public access, they know these areas of pressure. You've seen the pictures. Of course, the public will be attracted to be there, but there's a sense for responsibility, understanding that these are productive areas, and that's quite different than if you've got wading, ground nesting birds, and issues around dogs, in a sense, can be quite important. So the idea is that we have some case study videos. So we spent some time, we spent a day with, or long afternoons or mornings with the farmers. I'm not going to risk the Wi-Fi and play you 3 minutes. I haven't got time anyway. But they're available. They're going to be available on WWT, the Flourishing Floodplain website. So basically, we spoke to farmers. We went to talk to them about that experience. And so there's short segments asking about how do you make your hay, how do you feel about the future, etc. So you've got we can have short versions on different aspects, but the whole thing is sort of 10 to 15 minutes. So within those case studies, at the front, the 4 case study farms we've got, so different aspects that we've got, and so please come and pick one if you're interested. So looked at key facts, what's their experience about it, how's they're looking at nature-friendly farming, where do you get your advice from and support, what's the issues around soil types. Lots of the farmers are measuring and their soil types and looking at, their soil organic matter range from sort of 17 to 25%. And if you're not up to speed, then you'll know that some arable farmers struggle to get to 5%. So massive store of benefit of carbon. The benefit of their hay, which they find is really nutritious, particularly in the winter, etc. Lovely to get to them talk about the wildlife on their farms and how they see and experience and value that, etc. Crucial aspect that many, of course, farmers are getting interested is the economics. How does it stack up? And the key aspect around agri-environment schemes, but managing these places. And the one word that all 4 of them used was that you need to be flexible, as I'm sure Andy will talk about. Oh, so there's the fact sheets. That's an image there, and you'll find the 4 farmers in the front there, sort of 2-3 pages. So very quickly, example. So this is Greg, who farms in Severn Vale, 550 hectare farm. I'm not sure I really got time to share much detail on here, but you'll see the maps at the bottom there, different colours. So don't think that all floodplains are the same soil type. So that's I think the dark is clay and the lighter is more sandier soil. He farms on the edge of the River Severn and the River Wye. He uses the hay on the farm. He keeps it there. The livestock too is kept on the farm, and he sells it through into a chain of pubs they have. So it's quite a closed system. So he's in it. He's in higher tier. He gets advice from FWAG and his other family members. He said, his granddad has known and managed these fields for much longer than he has. It's very interesting because he benchmarks. He works out the top worst field for the bottom worst fields in his farm, and if a field is in that bottom 10 for 3 years in a row, then it's under special measures. So he has to come up with a plan about how he can get it out. So it's a really interesting approach. He's introduced culverts to help with the water levels. He's herbal lays on some areas, but he's left some to go sort of vegetate themselves, so in a sense where the water levels are really high. So really interesting. He actually has some arable within his there, so he looks at some aspects there around sensitive crops, but he's always leaving the stubble. So he has some non-rotational higher tier options and some rotational ones. So managing that scheme. So lastly, so talking to all of these people in the different areas, we want to come up with some policy areas that we could form for flourishing floodplains. And this is a part of the whole wider project. So really we came up with 4 asks. We need to support actions which enhance the floodplains, and particularly issues around flexibility within agri-environment schemes, encouraging things like seed harvesting, and increased payments for all water storage. So some of these floodplains are above settlements, so of course it's logical you take the water there, so you're protecting properties and businesses further downstream. That could easily be part of a revised scheme. It's really important, we think, that you trial different mechanisms here. So things like floodplain meadows are really right for a results-based payment system based on outcomes. They're really good for collaborative advice that farmers like to share with farmers. Very important that there's a current consultation which is just closed about changing the tax regime, particularly if you're going to look at longer term agreements. As you'll glean from hearing to Claire and David, it's really important to embrace multiple benefits of managing floodplains. There's a massive issue around storing carbon. We talked about reducing flooding, and there's undoubtedly biodiversity benefits. And finally, we need a little bit more clarity around the public and private finance opportunities. Private finance has a role to play, but there's a little bit more confidence on that. So I'll leave it there, and then you'll hear more about specific from Andy next.
Thank you, Chris. Lastly, we've got an actual farmer.
Right.
Andy Rumming's farm and his family, they've been farming cattle on the banks of the Thames at Waterhay near Cirencester, and also near Swindon. And he uses a floodplain meadow on the edge of Cricklade, which is a SSSI, and is a National Nature Reserve. He actually uses for branding, which we love him for, the Snake's Head Fritillary, which is the traditional spring flower that comes. It's a beautiful sight if you ever get a chance to go to Cricklade. It's absolutely glorious. So Andy, I'm so sorry. Is there any questions for Chris? I was so excited to introduce Andy, I forgot about any questions. Very quickly, yes. Oops, sorry. Oh, no, the lady just down here.
Sorry about that, thank you. On policy, one of the issues on floodplains is sewage. Are you also tackling that?
Yes, that was an interesting issue. Not quite answering your question, but the farmers talked about you want your highest tide to come first, because then all your tide lines are a little bit lower down. The worst thing you want is progressively worse, so you have 3 different tide lines to tidy up. Yeah, so whilst obviously your flooding gets nutrients, but you bring a whole load of other aspects too. I don't think there's anything specific the farmers came up in relation to sewage, in relation to floodplains, but it's undoubted that your nutrients are not always the lovely sort that you wish to have. And that does bring it doesn't help weed burden either. So I think we'd need more detail on that, but nothing specific, but there's no reason why since you're not suffering the same challenges that other aspects suffer around sewage. So, sorry, not much help, but yes.
Okay, Andy, can I hand it over to you then?
Okay. So, my name's Andy Rumming. We farm at Waterhay Farm, quite aptly named, near Cricklade, so just on the Wiltshire-Gloucestershire border. We are basically a cattle operation, so we've got 90 suckler cows, hybrid cattle, and 2 different herds. One's just started calving about 3 days ago, and the other calves in the spring. So what I want to just say a few words about is about how we try and integrate floodplain meadows into a kind of a profitable agricultural system. And that's kind of that's absolutely key, because as some of the other speakers have said, they produce some amazing public goods, but also the ones that we work on can produce really significant amounts of high quality fodder. So what we mainly use them for is to produce hay to feed our dry cattle. So we're using, as I said, hybrid cattle. We're using stabilizers, bulls for our maternal lines. So we've got small hardy cattle that can process loads of forage. And then we've been using, up until very recently, this it's a Australian Hereford as our terminal sire. So we also have an on-farm butchery. And so we're very, very interested in producing quality carcasses under 30 months that can go direct to customers. And the floodplain meadow is an essential part of that whole agricultural system. Oh dear. So about a third of our farm floods, so that's probably about 50 acres. This is at home. And this can be a bit of a challenge, but you can't do anything about it. You can't fight it, so you have to kind of just kind of live with it. So on a sort of a reasonable size flood, there'll be, I worked out, about 500 million litres of water on the farm, and that's moving the whole time. And so the best agricultural tool you can have is a canoe, because you can get kind of depressed about all this land underwater, or you can go out and explore it and see what it's doing, because it is a really dynamic habitat full of birds and lots of things going on. And it's always interesting to see which bits have flooded, how high it's flooded compared with other years, and some of our highest flooding ever was this year. The levels are getting higher, and they're probably hanging around a bit longer than they were in the past. But anyway, yeah, so this is North Meadow, which we've heard a little bit about and seen some soil analysis from there. So it's got snake's head fritillary in it. It's got 80% of Britain's snake's head fritillaries in one field. And we're lucky enough to be one of the, I think, between 2 and 4 farmers that make hay there. And so what we're doing is we're branding our meat products with the fritillary logo. We're branding our leather products with the fritillary logo. And we're trying to make that direct connection with the customer and to tell the whole story. So if you're farming in one of these very diverse, high nature systems, it is potentially a massive opportunity for branding. And customers are very interested. And so we try and do that. And we also, selling direct for us means that we make a lot more money. So the margin on the meat processing side is significant and is much more predictable. On the actual cattle side, that is quite a challenge. But there are further ways that we can integrate the floodplain meadows. So, for example, efficiency of haymaking. So we've moved everything to big square bales, except for one site where our contractor will not take his baler there because it's too difficult to access. But everything else, big 4-string bales. We're using a rake that is contour following rake, which are amazing. That's increased our hay yield by probably 15%. So it's basically, it floats and follows the ground contours and is picking up more hay. And that's also great because it's removing more nutrients off. So there are a few things that we can do to kind of improve the efficiency of our haymaking, but you've still got to have that weather window. And so we've got a reasonable amount cut at the moment, just waiting. Hopefully Uncle has turned it today. I shall ring him later. But actually, the last 5 years we've been doing this, we've actually made good hay and we've got a window. Just a few pictures of butchery. Again, for us to make it work financially, it's about telling the story and taking it through the whole process. And we're doing charcuterie. All our bones go to a bone broth maker in London. And yeah, we're just trying to sell every part we can. So as I said, there are some solutions to integrating more floodplain meadows into your business, which is about improving your haymaking. Also, it is regenerative farming. It fits all the boxes. So we should be doing more of this. And also, the key to this is having people who want to eat your food. And there are more and more people out there who they're not going to go completely plant-based. They're not going to go vegetarian or vegan. So they are omnivores, and they are interested in food that actually has a story, is good for the planet. And there's a huge amount of them out there. So I think the future to sustaining floodplain meadows is to connect with more of these people, tell them the story, bring them on farm, and sell them your products. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I was quite sorry you didn't show your picture of your boot making workshop that you're looking to do. Andy actually has a pair of boots that he's made from leather produced from the cattle who has used the meadow, and actually has it stamped with the Snake's Head Fritillary. We're all very jealous and angling for a workshop. We've got about 10 minutes. There is another slide just to put up. I wanted this to be a sort of workshop, but like I said, it's a bit difficult but I've put up 4 sort of questions or issues just to sort of prod people into thinking about, actually, we do have these, we already have people who are managing it, who are already passionate about it. Actually, what would encourage more? Like we said, there's a very, very small amount of this floodplain meadow now, but actually, what would, we want to get to about 70,000 hectares, if not more. So actually, what would encourage farmers and others to support this? So there is those questions. Either put up your hand about that or scribble it down. But if you do have any questions, any further questions now, please do put up your hand. Just going to give this lady here.
Hi, my name is Fanny Watson. We have an organic farm in Yorkshire, and I have a very practical, actually, request. How does anyone keep their fences when it floods? We have major problems with us because it's a spate river. We've got the wharf, and you go down, you think, right, we're going to sort of get it, and of course the river's come in and it's taken all the fencing out, and what's more, it's dumped so much rubbish in the middle of the field, and it's the most soul-destroying thing because it's a massive expense, and for us it's a real challenge because the river is getting higher and higher, and it's actually sort of flooding much more frequently. And so even though we've planted, we've got the willows being planted to try and, just on the bank, help hold the banking together. But for us, in the ideal world, we would be grazing it, but we can't because actually we can't keep it fenced. So if anyone's got a brilliant idea about how to fence a water meadow, I'd be absolutely chuffed to bits.
Yeah, so we do have to regularly replace stakes. So we use creosoted stakes, and they seem to last quite a while. But also we have a good, perhaps 5 meters between the actual watercourse and the fence, which is willow scrub. We have a few gaps in it, but it's great for warblers. It's really good habitat, and I think it does take the force out of the river. So I think having a scrub boundary between the channel and the fence is really good. If you're fencing right up to the channel, I think it's really vulnerable.
Thank you. If anyone has any answers, please do find this lady here. Were you anyone, David or Claire or Chris?
Yeah, I expected when we talked to farmers that would be the real issue. They were quite stoical about it. In a sense, I think I asked one of them specifically. He said, well, I guess we balance the benefits we get in terms of the nutrients with the real pain of having to sweep up. It never gives us anything useful. He says, the best thing I had was a Bowser. Trouble is, I knew whose it was, so I had to give it back. But, in terms of, well, there are technologies you can grazing without a fence. If you pop over to no fence, it's a possibility. But anyway, that's... Well, when we talk later, because it shouldn't get to your neighbours, but yeah.
Okay, there's a gentleman down here in the blue.
Just a real quick question, thank you. How difficult are they to establish? You find with most species-rich grassland or some of the mixes we talked about there, they can be quite a challenge on different soil types. And then how long does it take to establish?
I'm going to go down the line.
Okay. We are following a lot of schemes currently trying to restore the meadows. Initially, it's quite straightforward. As I showed, you could either use brush harvested seed from an existing meadow or spreading green hay, or indeed just rolling out traditionally made hay bales for cattle to eat on your receiver land. So there has been a lot of success. We've got a number of case studies on the website describing what's happened. Quite often it does need more than one go because, as we're hearing, we're at the mercy of the weather. If you spread seed and then a big flood comes down, you lose a lot of it. So the best examples we can point to have often had 2 or 3 goes because different species establish well in different years. In terms of how long it takes, again, it's how long's a piece of string. To get an ancient meadow, you probably are looking at decades, possibly a century, but you get a very effective, productive grassland within a few years. It just takes time for that high diversity, the intimate knitting together of species. There's very little you can do to hurry that up. It's just the annual hay cut will gradually encourage species to diversify. So the longest restoration site we've followed is now 35 years old, and it probably is of SSSI quality. So you can get a very nice looking meadow, probably within 10 years. But the purists who are looking at diversity of insects and fungi will say that you're not fully restoring a system. It probably has to be 100 years old before you get all the benefits.
I'd just like to add that it's probably the management afterwards that is very important into getting to that point. The introduction of seed is just the first part of it, so it's making sure that the management afterwards is spot on.
Okay. I saw this gentleman first. If you want to... How much longer have we got, by the way? 10 minutes. Oh.
Yes, Nick Lear. I've got 300 acres in Sussex. There's a stream running through which floods, and probably that's about 50 acres that floods, or 40 or something like that. It's grassland, probably a bit improved, and it's managed by grazing mainly. Now, I want to know how important it is that it's for these meadows to exist. Do they have to be cut for hay, or is it a mix of cutting and grazing, or is some of it grazed?
I'll do that. To be a meadow, it does need to be cut. That's almost the definition of a meadow. But you can then graze the aftermath. That is what's quite widely practiced. On the continent in Europe, it's more typical to take 2 hay cuts, one in June, one in September, which was once the more widespread here as well. But currently, most floodplain meadows are cut in June or July and then grazed from August onwards. And the key thing, and it relates to the first question we had about is it necessary to cut at all? It is where you're getting regular floods and you're getting sediment deposition. The sewage question we had here flags the point that our rivers carry a lot more nutrient than they did historically. So cutting is really key to keep the whole system in balance, because if you're purely grazing, what goes in one end of a cow tends to come out the other, and the nutrients are kept on site. But if you're taking a hay crop, as Andy's been describing, you're taking a lot of nutrient out of the gate each year and keeping the system well balanced. And to have these really diverse meadows, you do need to keep that nutrient pool lower. It's all a bit of a balancing act that you do need some nutrient input from floods is a good thing, but it's very easy to have too much of a good thing in this case if the rivers are polluted and the floods are too frequent, and then it becomes very key to cut early to effectively remove the nutrients from the system and keep it all in balance. So yes, we would certainly encourage you to try some haymaking on those 50 acres and see what biodiversity benefits result.
I did see, yeah, sorry, this gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting talk. The river through us has had its banks built up specifically to keep it in the channel. And if we wanted to change that, would we have to seek permission? And how hard is it to get that permission?
Everyone just did this whole kind of glancing thing at one another then.
It would certainly be worth informing the Environment Agency what you plan to do. They do have all sorts of regulations about moving soil within a floodplain. But their interest ultimately is not to lose flood storage space. So what you're describing quite possibly could increase the capacity of the floodplain to store water. So they may well be in favour. They may even be able to grant fund some of the work. Certainly on schemes that we've been involved in, the Environment Agency have looked to remove bunds along rivers. Quite often that bunds have just appeared from old slubbings from clearing the river and weren't ever intended to be there. So reconnecting the river with its floodplain is, I think, a policy within the Environment Agency. Certainly Natural England supports it. So definitely I would encourage you to have those conversations. Come to us if you'd like us to broker that for you, because both the Environment Agency and Natural England, as Olivia said at the outset, and Natural Resources Wales are all part of the partnership. They're all keen to see more floodplain meadow. So if removing barriers, embankments is part of that, then you should get a positive response.
Chris?
Yeah, just to add, it's not that always that the barrier needs to have been added or the banks built up. If you keep your rivers clear, then you're really encouraging your river to incise itself further and further into its and detach itself from the fields around it. So you may not have to alter the banks. If you just put debris into the stream, then you're going to raise up the stream bed. So in that sense, and a high flow would equally break out. But as David says, very important to talk to the Environment Agents, because people with a settlement anyway and may not be too pleased.
Okay, I think I've got time for one more question. This gentleman, just very easily. No, right behind you. Oh, sorry. Warmer. There you
go. In Kent, we have the Stodmarsh problem, nutrient neutrality problem, phosphates in the protected Ramsar site. And a number of planning applications already submitted for the construction of engineered wetlands in the Stour floodplain. Presumably that's not something that anyone should really be in favour of. And, what can one do to resist this? There's a huge momentum in favour because all the development in Canterbury and Ashford is on hold until nutrient neutrality is resolved.
Yeah, well, we're trying to promote meadows, floodplain meadows, as a solution so that if more meadow was created on the floodplain because it exports phosphorus out of the river system, it should be rewarded with credits. So developers looking to buy credits would hopefully pay a farmer to manage a floodplain meadow. We're in active discussions with Natural England about how that can happen mechanistically. We're running a trial in Somerset which has a similar issue with the Somerset levels as you have on Stodmarsh. And yeah, the signals are positive. How quickly things will happen, I can't say. But we do see meadows as a solution because they really take the nutrient out of the river system, which is the ultimate goal. Constructed wetlands simply store the nutrient, and to have a constructed wetland in a floodplain is not a good idea at all, because ultimately a big flood will come along and resuspend all that sediment and spread it across the floodplain. So yeah, it's easier for the bureaucrats really to think about constructed wetlands because it's easier to measure and define what's being done. But we're working with Natural England to try and do the same thing for floodplain meadows so that people who are taking nutrients out of a floodplain get rewarded for it.
Thank you, David. I think we've come to an end. I know there was a couple more people want to ask questions. If you want to come up to us and just speak to us afterwards, that'd be great. I hope we have convinced you of the fabulous nature of floodplain meadows and their value that they have. And can I just say a big thank you to all 4 speakers who did a fantastic job of just keeping to time and answering questions.